Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, November 27th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 77.6 degrees with a low of 47.5 degrees, making for mild weather perfect for Thanksgiving gatherings, turkey trots, or a relaxing day with family and friends. Happy Thanksgiving! Coming up, we'll break down the reasons Georgia dismissed its RICO prosecution against Trump, examine the restrictions the DOJ is placing on RealPage's rent pricing algorithm, plus other key stories from around the nation and world. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning. A blockbuster decision in Georgia has upended a major Trump case. Reporter Ethan Harper is with us. Ethan, what happened?
Yesterday, November 26, 2025, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee dismissed the Georgia RICO election interference case in its entirety. According to the Associated Press, carried by WTOP and U.S. News and World Report, that ends the last active criminal prosecution tied to Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 result in Georgia. 4 defendants had already pleaded guilty, but the remaining 15, including Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and Mark Meadows, are now off the hook in Georgia.
Who asked the judge to dismiss it?
The motion came from Pete Skandalakis, the executive director of Georgia's Prosecuting Attorneys Council, who took over after Fani Willis was disqualified. Courthouse News Service and 11 Alive report he filed a 23-page analysis urging dismissal after what he called a thorough review. Judge McAfee agreed and granted it, closing the case at the state level.
Why did Skandalakis walk away from a case this big?
He said the case was too complex, riddled with legal obstacles, and practically impossible to bring to trial anytime soon. AP's reporting notes he predicted trials wouldn't start until roughly 2029 to 2031, given the appeals and logistics, especially with Trump as a sitting president. He also argued the alleged conspiracy was conceived in Washington, so a federal venue made more sense.
Did he praise the federal approach?
He did. He called special counsel Jack Smith's now-dismissed federal election case the strongest and most prosecutable framework, even as he acknowledged the Georgia RICO indictment had compelling elements. As U.S. News and World Report summarized, he framed his decision around the interests of justice and judicial finality, not just politics.
You mentioned Fani Willis was disqualified. Remind us why.
That centered on her romantic relationship with Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade. The Washington Post and AJC.com recount that in early 2024, Judge McAfee condemned what he called a tremendous lapse in judgment, but initially let Willis stay if Wade resigned, which he did. The Georgia Court of Appeals later removed her in December 2024 for the appearance of impropriety, and the state Supreme Court declined to reverse that in September of this year.
How did Skandalakis end up with the file?
After Willis was out, other prosecutors declined to take a case this massive and politically charged. According to 11 Alive, the prosecuting attorneys, counsel had the authority to reassign it, and Skandalakis ultimately appointed himself in early November. Within a few weeks, he recommended dropping it to serve what he called Georgia's broader interests.
What do we know about him?
He's a longtime Georgia prosecutor with a bipartisan resume highlighted by Newsweek and AJC.com. He served decades in the Coweta Judicial Circuit, first as Chief Assistant DA and then as the elected DA from 1992 to 2017, and later took over the statewide council that trains prosecutors. He's been a Democrat and a Republican at different points, which, his supporters argue, underscores his claim that he's agenda-free and focused on the law.
Has he made similar calls before?
Yes, in politically sensitive matters. AP News notes that in 2022, as a special prosecutor, he declined charges against the officers involved in the Rayshard Brooks shooting, calling their use of force objectively reasonable. PBS and Rough Draft Atlanta reported he also cleared Republican Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones in 2024, finding no criminal intent after Willis was disqualified from that inquiry.
Back to the case. What exactly was dismissed?
Everything in the Georgia indictment. AP's coverage says this was the most expansive of Trump's 2023 cases, built around Georgia's RICO statute and including allegations from the January 2, 2021 call where Trump pressed Brad Raffensperger to find 779 votes. Judge McAfee's order grants the motion, bringing the state RICO prosecution to a complete halt.
Was this a ruling on presidential immunity?
No, the move didn't hinge on a new immunity finding. According to the AP, Skandalakis leaned on Department of Justice policy and practical considerations, essentially saying it would be nearly impossible to bring a sitting president to trial, as opposed to declaring a legal shield. Judge McAfee simply granted the dismissal motion.
So is this final? As in, it can't come back?
Most legal analysts say this appears to be without prejudice, meaning it could be refiled if time hasn't run out. Justia and Fine Law explain that Georgia's statutes of limitations vary. RICO typically carries a 5-year window from the end of the conduct, with some tolling possible. That means any revival at the state level would be racing the clock.
How tight is that clock?
Tight. If you peg the end of the alleged conduct to early 2021, that 5-year mark hits around early 2026, as Nolo's primer on Georgia limitations suggests. There can be brief extensions. Georgia law allows 6 months after a dismissal in some circumstances, but the window is closing fast.
What about federal charges down the road?
Those carry their own 5-year limits for most statutes, like conspiracy or obstruction, but DOJ has long followed the Office of Legal Counsel's view that it won't prosecute a sitting president. Slate points out that the clock can be tolled while a president is in office, so prosecutors don't lose the chance. Practically, that means any federal reboot would likely wait until after January 2029.
Even compare this to Trump's other cases.
AP's summary through WTOP lays it out. Jack Smith's 2 federal cases. The 2020 election matter and the Mar-a-Lago documents were dropped after Trump won in 2024 because DOJ won't try a sitting president. The New York hush money case resulted in a conviction, but in January 2025, a judge granted an unconditional discharge, effectively leaving the verdict without punishment. Now, Georgia's RICO case is dismissed, leaving Trump, as AP put it, largely unscathed.
How did the former president respond?
He celebrated. On social media he posted, quote, "Law and justice have prevailed. Corrupt Fani Willis witch hunt dismissed in its entirety," end quote. His Georgia attorney, Steve Sadow, told the AP this ended what he called political persecution and lawfare by a disqualified prosecutor.
And what did Skandalakis say to Georgians who wanted a trial?
He acknowledged their frustration but said the courts and the public aren't served by a sprawling, years-long legal slog that can't realistically reach a jury soon. Courthouse News reports he emphasized judicial economy and finality and reiterated his view that the most appropriate venue for what happened would be federal, not state. He framed it as a sober, not celebratory, decision.
Did the judge say anything beyond the order?
The order itself speaks for the court, but the backstory matters. The Washington Post notes Judge McAfee had already tossed some counts earlier, like false documents allegations, while letting others proceed before the change in prosecutors. Yesterday's ruling, as relayed by AP, was about granting the new prosecutor's motion rather than re-evaluating the whole record.
Let's revisit the Raffensperger call. How central was that?
It was the centerpiece. The AP and AJC.com have long described that recorded call, January 2, 2021, where Trump sought 11,779 votes, as the core factual pillar of the state case. The RICO framework wrapped that call together with alternate electors' efforts and pressure on officials to allege a broader conspiracy.
Remind us what RICO means in Georgia.
Georgia's RICO law allows prosecutors to tie multiple acts into an alleged criminal enterprise, even when those acts span different players and moments. It's been a favored tool in complex public corruption cases, which is why Willis used it. U.S. News & World Report points out her indictment was unusually wide-ranging for a political case.
You mentioned earlier practical problems with separate trials. Why?
Skandalakis argued that severing defendants, trying some while the lead defendant is effectively untriable, would be illogical, burdensome, and costly. According to WTOP's summary, He didn't see a manageable way to carve off pieces without duplicating witnesses, evidence, and legal fights for years. That calculus weighed heavily in his decision to end it.
Did McAfee's dismissal touch on the earlier Willis-Wade controversy?
Not in a new way. The judicial concerns about the appearance of impropriety had already culminated last December with Willis's disqualification, and were locked in when the state Supreme Court declined her appeal in September. Yesterday's order dealt with the case's present posture under new leadership, not relitigating that chapter.
What does this mean for Giuliani and Meadows?
They're in the same boat as Trump in Georgia. Charges dismissed. AP's reporting lists them among the 14 remaining co-defendants when the order came down. Any exposure they have now hinges on other jurisdictions, not Fulton County.
Is there any binding rule that states can't prosecute a sitting president?
No. Supreme Court cases like Trump versus Vance in 2020 allowed state subpoenas for presidential documents, and Clinton versus Jones in 1997 rejected blanket civil immunity for pre-office conduct. As Slate and Legal Guides note, there's no definitive ruling that bars state criminal charges, but DOJ policy and practical limits make it extraordinarily hard while a president is in office.
And Trump versus United States from 2024, does that factor here?
It dealt with immunity for official acts in federal prosecutions, not state charges for private conduct. Legal analysts emphasize that its reach is still being tested. But it wasn't the basis for this Georgia decision. Skandalakis leaned on feasibility, venue, and timing.
Could Georgia refile a narrower case quickly to beat the clock?
In theory, yes, but it would require a prosecutor willing to pick it up immediately in a case that fits within what's left of the limitations period. Justia and Georgia practice guides caution that RICO's 5-year clock makes that a race against time, and non-RICO counts like solicitation have their own 4 to 7 year windows. Given yesterday's dismissal, it's unlikely we'll see a new state filing in the weeks ahead.
You mentioned earlier that the federal case was dismissed without prejudice. What does that mean in practice?
It leaves the door open for a post-presidency reboot, subject to the statutes of limitations and any tolling that applies. Congress.gov summaries of the relevant statutes show 5-year limits for many of the federal offenses that had been at issue, like conspiracy and obstruction. Slate notes that DOJ could add the standard 6-month refiling extension if a case was timely when dismissed.
We've talked a lot about law. What about the public reaction?
It broke along familiar lines. Trump's allies cheered what they called a vindication and an end to a politically driven prosecution, while critics lamented what they see as accountability delayed, if not denied. AP said it sought comment from Fani Willis but hadn't reported a response by last night.
Has any of this set new legal precedent?
Not really. Judge McAfee didn't announce a new rule about presidents or RICO. He accepted a prosecutor's judgment call. The Washington Post and SF-Gate frame it as a consequential outcome, but not a doctrinal shift. The practical lesson is about timing, venue, and the limits of sprawling state cases against a sitting president.
Where does this leave the broader 2020 election accountability effort?
At the federal level, on hold until at least 2029, barring an unforeseen change in policy or posture. In Georgia, it's effectively closed unless another prosecutor defies the odds and the calendar. As 11 Alive and Courthouse News put it, the 5-year saga has reached a full stop, for now.
Anything else we should know about the timing?
Just that the judge's order landed the day before today, so fresh that many filings were still being posted online overnight. The calendar matters here. With early 2026 looming for key statutes, the state's window is almost shut. That's part of why Skandalakis cast yesterday's decision as final in spirit, if not in absolute legal terms.
Ethan Harper, thanks for walking us through a complicated story.
Always glad to help, Grace.
This morning, a major development in the fight over rising rents. The Justice Department just announced new limits on RealPage's rent pricing software. Chloe, bring us up to speed.
2 days ago, on November 25th, the DOJ unveiled a proposed settlement with RealPage, the Texas company behind the YieldStar algorithm that many landlords use to set rents. Prosecutors say RealPage's tool allowed, quote, algorithmic collusion, end quote, by feeding landlords real-time confidential data about competitors, which drove coordinated rent hikes without anyone having to talk. The Associated Press, carried by outlets like the Nashua Telegraph and the Greenville Sun, framed it as a rare, sweeping federal intervention in the rental market. NPR's law desk said the message is broader antitrust enforcement in the age of AI.
What exactly is the government accusing RealPage of doing?
The DOJ says RealPage violated the Sherman Act by turning non-public data, actual rents, lease terms, even discounting, into daily price recommendations across competing landlords. According to Justice.gov filings and ProPublica's investigations, the system discouraged bargaining, tolerated lower occupancy for higher yields, and promised clients they could, quote, outperform the market 3% to 7%, end quote. The allegation is that RealPage stitched competitive rivals together through data rather than phone calls. In the DOJ's words, it was a modern way to break a century-old law.
Did top officials weigh in on that?
They did. Attorney General Merrick Garland said, quote, Americans should not have to pay higher rents due to companies scheming with landlords to break the law, end quote, as reported by NPR and detailed in DOJ statements. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco emphasized restoring independent pricing decisions, meaning each landlord should set prices without a silent nudge from competitors. Data. Assistant Attorney General Gail Slater argued a settlement gets relief now, not years from now.
So what does this proposed settlement actually force RealPage to change?
A lot, if the court approves it. Justice Department summaries and coverage in outlets like KIRO7, KERA News, and Multifamily Dive say RealPage can't use non-public, real-time competitor data to calculate live rent recommendations anymore. They have to train models on older data, at least a year old, so the inputs are deliberately stale, which DOJ argues prevents ongoing coordination. And features that discouraged price cuts or aligned rival prices have to be reworked or removed.
There's also monitoring involved, right?
Yes. The agreement installs a court-appointed monitor for 3 years to track compliance, with regular reporting back to the judge, according to Justice.gov and analyses in Prospect. Some coverage suggests that could be extended to as long as 7 years if needed. RealPage also has to cooperate with ongoing suits against property managers that used its software.
Is RealPage admitting it did anything wrong here?
No, and that's important. Like many antitrust settlements, this one requires no admission of wrongdoing and no financial penalty, at least for RealPage itself. The company says it already started making changes, so customers shouldn't see a service disruption. RealPage's CEO Dirk Wakeham has argued in statements reported by the AP that the tool brings, quote, lower rents, less vacancies, and more pro-competitive effects, end quote, and their attorney has called earlier criticism misinformation.
Where does this stand in the courts today?
As of this morning, November 27th, it's still a proposal awaiting approval in the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of North Carolina. Under the Tunney Act, the DOJ will file a competitive impact statement for the Federal Register. Then a 60-day public comment window opens. After that, the judge decides whether the settlement serves the public interest. There's no public docket number posted yet, according to outlets like Housing Wire.
Remind us how we got here. When did the lawsuit start?
The DOJ filed its case in August 2024, joined by a coalition of state attorneys general, including North Carolina, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Minnesota, Oregon, Tennessee, and Washington. ProPublica's reporting, which started in 2022 and continued into 2025, helped lay groundwork by documenting how RealPage's software synchronized landlord behavior. AP photos this week even flashed back to DOJ imagery from that 2024 press conference to show the origins of the probe. The through line, as the Washington Post has noted in broader coverage, is that digital tools can power old-fashioned collusion at scale.
For renters listening, what changes might they notice if this goes through?
In theory, fewer coordinated price moves and more genuine competition. According to NPR, banning real-time confidential data and curbing features that align prices should push landlords back toward independent decisions, which is what antitrust law demands. That could mean more discounting and more wiggle room in negotiations, especially in buildings that relied heavily on the algorithm. But the real test will be what happens after the monitorship starts and the data goes stale.
Are there numbers backing up the DOJ's case?
There are. A December 2024 analysis by the White House Council of Economic Advisors, covered by the Washington Post and ProPublica, estimated that RealPage users charged renters about $70 more a month, a roughly 4% premium, adding up to $3.8 billion in 2023. Academic work by Wharton's Nancy Huadai Calder-Wang and J.J. Hyung, shared through Yale-linked repositories, found higher rents and lower vacancies in markets with more RealPage penetration after 2008, consistent with algorithmic coordination. Experts like antitrust scholar Maurice Stuck have said these outcomes look supra-competitive.
But critics argue rent increases had other causes. What's the counterpoint?
The R Street Institute, a free market think tank, argued in October 2024 that supply shortages and higher home prices did more to lift rents than software did. They even pointed to a negative correlation between RealPage's market share and local home price growth as a confounder. And RealPage often cites recent flat or declining rents in some cities as new supply opened up, as Marketplace has reported. The debate is whether the algorithm amplified tight markets or simply reflected them.
Beyond RealPage, have landlords faced consequences?
Yes, and recently. On November 19th, just 8 days ago, Greystar, the country's largest landlord, agreed to pay $50 million to settle a big class action suit and $7 million to end a 9-state case, according to AP coverage in the Greenville Sun and reporting by CPR. More than 24 property managers have settled similar claims over the past year. States like Washington pursued their own actions, building pressure from multiple fronts.
What about new laws? Are cities or states stepping in?
They are. California and New York passed bans or strict limits on rent-setting algorithms, and cities like Philadelphia and Seattle adopted ordinances targeting algorithmic pricing, as reported by outlets including Fast Company and GPB. RealPage even sued New York, raising First Amendment arguments according to Newsday's coverage. In Congress, sponsors introduced the End Rent Fixing Act of 2025, a sign lawmakers want bright-line rules.
How does the software work under the hood?
Landlords feed in their performance data, and the system harvests non-public stats from other participating landlords, then returns daily rent recommendations. ProPublica and Justice.gov filings say it also encouraged strategies like refusing concessions, limiting bargaining, and accepting lower occupancy to maintain higher price points. The Greenville Sun's AP wire explained that this let landlords track competitors' prices through confidential data, making coordination possible without a phone call. It's essentially a hub-and-spoke model, with the algorithm as the hub.
You mentioned features that discouraged price cuts. What's changing there?
The proposed order requires RealPage to remove or redesign tools that nudge landlords toward alignment or that block discounts. According to analyses on BizNow and MLex, the models also have to operate on broader geographies. No ultra-local micromarkets that could cement neighborhood-level coordination. And market surveys that once gathered sensitive information are supposed to stop, alongside bans on discussing non-public-based trends in revenue meetings. The idea is to strip out the glue that binds competitors together.
Does the settlement say how old the data must be?
Yes, and it's specific. The models can use non-public historical data only if it's at least 12 months old, instead of active lease information. As the DOJ's competitive impact statement will spell out, using stale inputs reduces the risk that one landlord's price decision today immediately shifts a neighbor's price tomorrow. It's a way to preserve analytics while blunting the coordinating effect.
How quickly could renters feel any relief?
The DOJ says the benefit of settlement over trial is speed, relief now, not 3 years from now, as Gail Slater put it. But practically, the Tunney Act process takes at least 60 days for comments once the notice hits the Federal Register, so we're looking at early next year for final approval at the earliest. After that, the monitor steps in, and compliance milestones roll out. Rent effects could lag as leases renew and pricing tools are reconfigured.
Are landlords barred from talking about pricing altogether?
Not entirely, but the settlement clamps down on practices that share or infer competitors' secrets. According to justice.gov, RealPage can't facilitate exchanges of non-public, competitively sensitive data, and it can't present analysis built on that information in revenue management meetings. Public, aggregated information is different from live deals and concessions behind the scenes. The focus is restoring independent decision-making, not gagging market commentary.
What happens if the monitor finds violations?
The court retains oversight, and the monitor reports back with compliance assessments, giving the judge leverage to impose sanctions or extend oversight, as Prospect noted. Some coverage mentions the possibility of extending monitoring up to 7 years if problems persist. RealPage also agreed to cooperate with ongoing enforcement against property managers, which could increase pressure on users to comply. That combination is meant to deter backsliding.
Could this settlement change how algorithms are used in other industries?
It's already being read that way. The Washington Post and ProPublica have framed this as a pivotal check on AI-driven pricing, where models can become coordination engines if they ingest competitors' secrets. Antitrust enforcers can now point to a concrete remedy package, ban real-time rival data, age the inputs, broaden geographies that could migrate to airlines, hotels, even online retail. The broader lesson is that algorithms don't get a free pass under century-old laws.
Does RealPage still argue its data are anonymized?
Yes, and they emphasize that point in their defense. But the DOJ counters that anonymized and aggregated doesn't mean harmless if the data are timely and granular enough to steer competitors into parallel moves, which NPR highlighted. The settlement doesn't take that on faith. It removes the real-time, non-public fuel regardless of anonymization. That way, anonymization alone isn't a loophole.
Could we see rents fall because of this?
It's plausible in markets where coordinated moves propped up prices, but it won't be uniform. Economists say fundamentals, new construction, local demand, wage growth, still dominate rent trends. That said, the White House CEA's $70 a month estimate suggests meaningful room for competition to shave premiums where RealPage was deeply embedded, as the Washington Post reported. We'll need post-approval data to see the magnitude.
What should renters do in the meantime?
Keep watching local rent trends and negotiate harder where vacancies are rising. If you suspect algorithmic pricing is still steering your building, you can flag concerns to state AGs or the DOJ during the Tunney Act comment period, which should open soon after the Federal Register notice posts. Tenant groups are likely to submit formal comments, and renters' voices can shape final conditions. And remember, some cities now restrict these tools outright.
Any final context on why the DOJ went this route instead of trial?
Trials are slow and uncertain, especially with complex algorithms, and rents are a daily pressure. According to NPR and Justice.gov, enforcers decided the immediate structural changes, plus a monitor, would protect renters faster than litigating for years. If the court approves, it creates a template other software providers will study carefully. It's a signal that antitrust law has adapted to the algorithmic age.
Chloe, thanks for breaking that down so clearly. We'll keep following the court's next steps and the comment period ahead. Here are some other headlines. In Hong Kong, a renovation gone wrong became a citywide alarm. At least 55 people, including a firefighter, have died after a massive blaze ripped through the Wang Food Court complex in Taipo. The fire sparked Wednesday afternoon on external bamboo scaffolding and, fanned by strong winds and flammable foam, leapt like a fuse along 7 of the estate's 8 towers, burning into Thursday. Police have arrested 3 executives from the construction contractor on suspicion of manslaughter, citing gross negligence over safety standards. With roughly 280 residents still unaccounted for, authorities launched citywide inspections of renovation sites, reigniting debate over fire codes in Hong Kong's dense high-rise maze, where scaffolding went from support to spark plug. In Guinea-Bissau, ballots gave way to barracks. Soldiers appeared on state television across 2 mornings to announce they've seized power, dissolved state institutions, and arrested President Umaro Sissoco Embalo. The self-styled High Military Command for the Restoration of National Security and Public Order says it acted to stop a plot by politicians and drug traffickers to rig the disputed November 23 election. Embalo confirmed he's been deposed and detained. The junta named General Horta Inta A as transitional leader, suspended the constitution, and shuttered borders. It's the nation's 4th successful coup since independence, a tightening in West Africa's coup belt that unbuckles regional security cooperation and aid, even as both Embalo and opposition candidate Fernando Diaz had claimed victory in a vote that was never released. ECOWAS and the African Union condemned the takeover. In the high-stakes freeze of Ukraine diplomacy, the hottest debate is over cold cash. Roughly $300 billion in frozen Russian central bank assets has become the centerpiece of intensified peace talks. A draft 28-point plan attributed to the Trump administration would steer $100 billion, most held in Belgium, into a U.S.-led investment vehicle for Ukraine's reconstruction, with half the profits flowing back to Washington. Across the Atlantic, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is urging EU members to finalize a legal path to seize assets directly for Kiev's 2026-2027 military and budget needs, wary that Washington's plan waffles control away from Brussels and shortchanges Ukraine. Kiev rejects treating the funds as a bargaining chip, insisting they're lawful reparations. Moscow has rebuffed the draft. The Commission is pressing Belgium to act before a decisive December summit, racing the clock as US-Russia talks loom. In Denmark, carbon is being told to hold its breath. Project Greensand, led by Ineos with Harbour Energy, is set to become the EU's first fully operational offshore carbon capture and storage site, injecting liquefied CO2 into the depleted Nini oil field 800 meters under the North Sea, turning oil wells into carbon wells. While headlines hint at immediate action, full commercial operations are slated for 2026, starting at 400,000 tons a year and scaling to 8 million by 2030. Following Norway's Northern Lights, this EU flagship flips the script on fossil infrastructure, out with gushers, in with hushers. And in Peru, a former president goes from polling to parole watch. A court sentenced Martín Vizcarra to 14 years for taking over $600,000 in bribes as Moquegua governor from Obraenza and ICC-GSA, tied to the Lomas de Hilo irrigation and Moquegua hospital contracts. The ruling takes effect immediately, bars him from public office for 9 years, locking him out of 2026, and nudges Peru Primero toward his brother Mario as a stand-in. Vizcarra joins a crowded ex-president's docket, with transfer to Barbadillo prison underscoring Peru's justice system, saying, payback time, not comeback time. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.